Welcome to A Little Bit Radical, a business podcast from Standing on Giants. I'm Rob, your host. Join me as I meet people and organisations who are doing things differently, challenging the status quo and, yes, might just be a little bit radical. My guest today is on a mission to make mindfulness more accessible and inclusive from the classroom to the boardroom. Amy Polly is the self-styled Mindfulness Rebel. In a world of very serious, very blue information around mental health, she's a welcome shot of pink. And in fact, she is wearing pink right now, even though you can't see her. She's the former strategic lead for mental health and wellbeing for the fire service and has since worked with Bupa, Heineken, Sweaty Betty and many others, designing their mental health and wellbeing strategies. She's a regular fixture on our news channels and radio on the topic of mindfulness, mental health and neurodiversity. There's a lot to get into today. So Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, Rob. Thank you.
We're very excited to have you. So Amy, if you are a little bit radical and you're on this podcast, so we know you are, what do you think in your early life set you up for that?
Do you know what? I've done a lot of reflecting on this over the years. I guess that's what you do when you start to work on yourself. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that my granddad was addicted to alcohol for my whole life. Now, I didn't know any different. That's just how I grew up. However, I do think it informed probably the way that I was in certain situations. I liked to bring the joy, and I was the one that would try to bring the laughter or bring the lightness when things were maybe a bit tough, especially if, my mum was feeling upset because it was her dad. And I think that informed a lot of what I am like. I do like to be the joker and do things in a bit of a different way to make people smile. And I also had really supportive parents. I still have really supportive parents. I think that's informed a lot of how I am as well, because especially my mum, I feel like I've had the permission to be myself as I was growing up and to be that joy bringer. And so then I guess as you're growing up, that turns into maybe being what's deemed as a bit more radical, because I don't have too much fear now of being myself, minus the teenage years, because other people's influence when you're a teenager maybe does stifle you a little bit. So yeah, I think my early life, there were some struggles, but I had a really good support network, which allowed me to be a bit radical.
It's a great answer and quite a common theme on this podcast with lots of guests having something that was quite challenging in their early years, but also in having that supportive foundation, that safety net to allow you to kind of do things that were a little bit different. So it sounds like you had that.
Definitely. Isn't that interesting that is quite a common thing? Because I guess if you had one without the other, it might be quite different. I just love hearing people's stories. I know we haven't got long today. There's so much you can go into, but I think that's really interesting how people take some of those things and how they run with it. And the fact that informs people being radical is because I think you often see you be the change that you want to see. So when things have happened to you, or you have had a good support network, you either want to change something or you want to be that support for other people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And as an adult, Amy, do you think you've become more or less radical, and what's been behind that? I mean, you've branded yourself as the Mindfulness Rebel. So I'm thinking that you really have learned to lean into your radical nature as you've got older.
So true. You know what? What a match made in heaven is this, by the way. I think, yeah, as an adult, I have definitely embraced that, because I feel like as you grow, you find yourself more. As you go on that journey of understanding yourself, you become more confident to be yourself. And I know that I'm not perfect, and I know that there's things that I need to work on or things that I need to inwardly look at. But I also know there's some things that I'm really good at. And I think that having that self-awareness has really been key. So now as an adult, I know that I can push expectations and push boundaries because it's coming from a good place. And I've learned that it's okay to be different. It's okay to think differently. And actually now I embrace that. So definitely as an adult, yes, I think so. And I love it.
This is common as well. With a bit of experience, with a bit of wisdom, learning that ultimately being authentic is the right way to go, and being more confident in who you really are rather than trying to fit someone else's version of success or whatever. So we're going to move on to your work now, Amy, in this fascinating area of mindfulness and well-being and creating a kind of mentally well workforce. But I understand that you were an accountant for 19 years. So draw the line for us there from the start of your career to now.
I mean, talking about being radical, right? So what's more radical than leaving a 19-year good accountancy career to move into something completely different in terms of moving into mindfulness and mental health and wellbeing and running your own business? So none of that safety net of having that job. So I started my accountancy career right from school. I left sixth form and I started working in role whilst I was training on the job as a junior. And then I worked my way up. So my career was great. I worked through practice and I moved to industry and then I moved to public sector in the fire service. And I think it was at that point that I, again, had a really good support network within my role in the fire service. Again, allowing that radical, rebellious nature maybe to come out, that different thinking to be embraced, which I think helps it flourish. I think when your reason for getting up in the morning is to provide a service for people rather than a bottom line, things shift. And that's what I felt like when I was working in the public sector for the fire service. It was like a shift in the reason you were getting up in the morning. I felt like I was contributing to a bigger picture and I loved that feeling. And then after a while, I think my boss and myself realised that I loved people more than spreadsheets. And I got involved first in the employee engagement work. And I absolutely loved it. And it went really well. And when I then was very open about my mindfulness practice, which, by the way, I did not learn initially to be a teacher, I just learned for myself, I would share openly about that. Then I would share openly about my struggles after having my little boy and postnatal anxiety. And my boss just said to me one day, I know all the things you're into. I'd started talking about mindfulness in middle managers seminars and things. And he said, would you be strategic lead for mental health and wellbeing? And I jumped at the chance. And that was the catalyst for where I am now, because I realised that what I think is my life's purpose is to help other people, share what I've learned and support people to hopefully be well.
Absolutely fantastic. And I think you're right. It is a real radical move to leave that stable career and do something that's a new area, do it on your own trail, forge your own path. Now, your first job in mental health and well-being being how to lead that for firefighters. That sounds like, pardon the pun, a new meaning to the phrase baptism of fire, right? That must be a huge thing for that work, going into dangerous situations every day, witnessing the extremes of human emotion and life and death and all of that. So how do you even approach a problem like that? What did you do?
You know, it was an absolutely massive learning curve, but a brilliant one. Like you say, get chucked in at the deep end and you've got to get on with it. And I think it just comes down to being human. I never, even now, I don't pretend that I've got all of the answers. We're all learning all of the time. The beauty in that position was that we were basically starting from zero, from nothing. We were building this new thing, this new strategy, this new understanding, this new way of working, which then formed into an action plan and informed what we were going to do. And one of the most amazing things that happened was that when we started talking about what we were going to create, so I was leading, but I had a team. There was lots of people that were helping with this journey. And the amount of people that started to step up and want to be involved was one of the most heartwarming and brilliant things, because once you give people permission, especially to talk about something that is difficult, it is surprising how much people want to help other people. They just do. So I had firefighters coming along that wanted to speak about really traumatic events, the impact it had had on them, the impact it had on their mental health, and what they wished they would see. And I think this is a really important point when we think about mental health and wellbeing strategies in organisations. Often people are sitting behind a closed door trying to pull this stuff together. And the best thing you can do is go and talk to your people. And that was the first thing that I did. You know, assessing those risks and then looking at what could impact mental health and wellbeing in the service. That's all well and good, but you need to talk to your people. And that is where it all started. So for me, it's just about bringing back that human, having those conversations and being open to knowing that you haven't got all the answers and coming together as an organisation to be able to find what might work best. And also, it's a rolling thing. Like, you're never going to tick box and done. there's always going to be different things cropping up.
It's a really good answer. Yeah. And I want to ask you more about it. I get the sense that what was probably there before you started this work in the fire service was maybe support for people in crisis. I imagine that there was, sort of time off and sort of trauma response stuff. And I think in general, it seems like we're moving mental health from a position of how to help people when they're in real crisis to a more proactive mental health, mental wellness, like going to the gym is used as an analogy a lot of the time. So what sort of things did you bring in to help those firefighters then? And I imagine that you've adopted lots of the same kind of tactics now.
Yeah, so obviously each organisation is going to be different. You're going to have different cultures, you're going to have different risks, all of that. By the way, you are absolutely right. It was, and we see this, I think, a lot, even in the past few years, it started to change, that it was very much about that crisis point and having support at that crisis point. But we know that we need to proactively try to prevent those things. Now, fire service is slightly different. You are not going to get away from some of the events that people are going to be involved in being traumatic. So that's one element of it. But when you're looking holistically at the whole picture, and looking at that proactive, preventative piece, you really have to come back to basics. And that's for anybody in the organisation. And those basics are, how are you managed? How do you take care of each other within your team? What is your culture? What is your workload like? Are you psychologically safe to speak up and to be able to be who you are? And I think that often people look at a mental health and wellbeing strategy and think it's all these extra exciting things that you need to do. But you first have to come back to the basics, and the basics are the everyday stuff. Those dickhead bosses, those people that are not pulling their weight, those workloads that are unmanageable, those hours that are being spent when they shouldn't be. All of that basic stuff is also your mental health and wellbeing strategy. So that's the proactive bit. And I'm sure you can tell now where this thread is as to why mindfulness links into all of the work that I do, because I believe that if you're going to invest in some training, of which there's lots of different training, mindfulness is one of the things where you're investing in proactive brain training that somebody is then taken away as an individual, which can impact lots of different areas of their life, but you're also introducing something into the organisation that is more proactive and preventative. So it all links together in the end. But yeah, I would say those basics can't be overlooked.
I'm really glad you've drawn attention to those. We're going to move on to the practice of mindfulness next, but I perhaps want to just stay on this point just for one more question, which is, I love what you said. Ultimately, it's about the workload, it's about the stress, it's about the culture. Our company implemented personal days quite a few years ago now. So this an idea that you can just take a day off work without having to disclose the reason actually was probably the main point, but then it was a part of our mental health strategy. And that's been very powerful, just even as a message that, like we recognize that everyone in this company might need to take a day off, might need to just stop working for whatever reason. And we trust you to make that decision. Is that a good example that you've seen implemented elsewhere? Is that something you'd recommend? Is that a useful thing to bring into an organization?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. Again, it's just that awareness that there needs to be a more human side to the business world. What makes up your business? Human beings. And human beings are complicated, and life is sometimes complicated. And we know that we're going through a mental health crisis. So how are we going to help people? And do you know what the thing is? I think everybody that's listening to this will get this. Everybody, I feel like, can see where improvements could be made, but maybe there's a fear of saying it, because we know, don't we? Most people have been there when someone's dropped something in your lap at the last minute. And I'm not saying this never happens, of course, especially in lots of different sectors, but where something's put on you and that doesn't feel right, or the workload isn't being shared equally, or you've got someone that is showing a complete lack of respect to their colleagues or whatever it is, I think that we tend to overcomplicate things. And actually, this comes back down to respect, kindness, communication, and making our workplaces places that people want to be. And I don't think that's rocket science, although we seem to have overcomplicated it.
It certainly shouldn't be. And it's a pretty damning report on Western capitalism or business at large, that we've managed to end up with workplaces that are not conducive to just being a decent human being. That's quite worrying, isn't it? Luckily, I think there is a step change happening at the moment.
If people are so concerned with the bottom line, I get it, but to get the best out of your people, think about yourself. If I am feeling good, I'm probably going to do some good work. And now this is not about all of your employees feeling happy. I actually think I did a post on LinkedIn about that recently. It's not about happiness. It's about support. It's about being supported to be yourself, being supported to do good work, being supported to be human. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that's being overlooked in terms of productivity. Yes, you want to have the best for your bottom line. Well, how do you get the best for your bottom line? You treat your employees well and you look after them. Like, you would not have the tyres on your car run ragged because your car would not be so efficient. It's the same for your people. I'm not quite sure where that disconnect has come in, but you're not going to get the best out of your people if you're running them into the ground or you're not respecting them, or, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, a change is happening, I think.
I think there's a big movement to challenge the narrative that work is hard, work is a grind, work is something that you have to do, and you should almost never be happy at work. I feel like this old narrative was. There seems to be a movement in the opposite direction now.
Even as a mindfulness teacher, not every day of my life is great. That's just life. But I think that if you've got the majority of your time somewhere, you're feeling supported. And it doesn't mean you've not got a tough job. The actual job that you do might be difficult. It might be tiring, but that doesn't mean that you still can't feel supported or respected. I think that you're right. I think that there is a shift happening. I think sometimes work is hard, life is hard, but how do we navigate that to try to have that contentment and to navigate it the best that we can, really?
I love that, because you're exactly right. There's a big difference between doing a difficult job in a difficult culture and an unsupportive environment than doing that job feeling very supported. Huge, huge difference. So let's move on to mindfulness now. I'm going to start with a quote that's on your website, actually. This is not hippy-dippy stuff. It is a mental training practice proven by scientific evidence. And that was Peter Bosselman, who's the head of wellbeing at SAP, who said that. But I think mindfulness is sometimes maybe one of those terms that means different things to different people. So how do you sum it up?
I ask this question quite often when I'm teaching, have you heard of mindfulness? What do you think of when you think of the word mindfulness? Have you practiced mindfulness? And we do a bit of that reflection. And often when people hear the word mindfulness, and they're not a million miles away, but if someone sort of mentions mindfulness, it's, being present or being able to pay attention or doing some breathing or finding some peace. And all of that stuff is a part of mindfulness and is wonderful. However, I really want to sort of get deeper into what mindfulness is in terms of it is a brain training that really can affect your mindset. It can really help with how we deal with our day-to-day things. It isn't just about finding peace. It definitely isn't about emptying our mind. It's all about awareness. And I always say, if you change the word mindfulness for awareness, that might help you understand it better. So we all have awareness all of the time. It's not a brand new thing to do, but we often aren't conscious of where we're putting our awareness. We're very distracted, and be that from by phones, social media, people around you, kids, work, or whatever it is. But by training that awareness, by training your brain to engage the prefrontal cortex, you then are able to engage your brain in a different way when you come up against tough or stressful times. Or by even practicing mindfulness, you might not get to those crisis points as often. So mindfulness to me is a new outlook on life and how you interact with your thoughts, feelings, emotions, the events of life and other people. And we can train our brain to be a bit different. It doesn't have to be stuck in the rut that it's in. We know neuroplasticity is a thing. And so my mission is to get people through that door, not thinking that mindfulness is just about getting outside and doing a bit of breathing. It's so much more than that.
Fantastic. And you've kindly volunteered to take me and our listeners through this tour now, live on the podcast. Would you be happy to lead an exercise with us now?
Sure. So shall we do a breathing exercise? I've just said then that often people think of mindfulness and they think of a breathing exercise. Now, I'm not shying away from this, because when we start to practice mindfulness and we start to understand what it is, and we start to understand that we can train our awareness, that can be really hard from a place of never having done anything like that before, when you have got a really chatty mind like mine. So we have to start somewhere. And the beginning point for me is always this. It's noticing your autopilot in you every day, so paying attention to those things. And then it's the body or the breath being used as an anchor. So that brain training is training your brain to be aware of your breathing. And there's lots of different ways to do this, but we'll start with something that's easy, or maybe not, depending on
Yes,
what sort
please.
of day you're having.
It's beginner level for me.
But one of the caveats that I have to say to this as well, Rob, which is really important, is that when you get to the end of something like this, it's really important to know that there's no winning or losing. There's no failing. This is a practice. Some days I do it and I felt like I was present. I felt like I was aware, and that felt good. Other days, it's very easy to go, well, that was rubbish. My mind kept wandering and I don't feel like I've relaxed and da-da-da. The aim of a mindfulness practice is not to always feel relaxed. The aim is to just practice. That is it. Because the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. And even if you feel like your mind wandered a million times, you came back a million times. And so therefore you just practice mindfulness. So a really big caveat here that this is not about like tick, woo, I did it great. Okay.
That's absolutely fine. And I appreciate that.
We have a shuffle around. Just make sure you're comfortable, and maybe you could have your feet flat on the floor and just sitting up in your chair. And I'm just going to invite you to relax your shoulders and just allow your face to soften.
I noticed that I've automatically shut my eyes. There we go. That shows my
I was
sort of
about-
preconception about mindfulness, that I
was about to say it.
that I'm like pretending to be a monk or something. Yeah.
And when you're ready, you can close your eyes. And if you don't feel comfortable to close your eyes, you don't have to, but it helps me to focus. Some people, not so much. So you do whatever's comfortable for you. And then what we're going to do is, I'm just going to ask you if you can just try to bring your awareness to your feet. So really trying to focus on your feet and wiggle your toes if you need to. And just really feeling the weight of your feet right now. Perhaps you can notice if they're warm or cool. Maybe even the sensation of touch, where they're touching your socks, shoes, the floor. And not overthinking it, just seeing if you can notice your feet. And now I'm going to invite you to move that awareness to your breathing. So let's try noticing the rise and fall of your chest. And see if you can just try to make your breath slightly deeper. Just purposefully breathing, but that's still comfortable for you. And then just simply notice it. Notice the rise and fall of your chest, the movement of your ribs, your lungs expanding and contracting. And if your mind wanders, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. Just gently come back to your breathing. And just relax into it. Nothing else to do right now other than breathe. And take a nice deep breath all the way in and all the way out. All the way in and all the way out. And breathing comfortably for you. Just bringing that awareness now back to your feet. Wiggle your toes if you need to. Really feeling the weight of your feet right here, right now, present in this moment, knowing that you are safe and all is well. And take one final deep breath all the way in and all the way out. Breathing comfortably for you. Whenever you're ready, you can very slowly and very gently open your eyes. And have a little stretch.
Lovely.
How did that feel, Rob?
Still
I'm
stretching,
interested to know how that felt.
The word I've got is sort of fuzzy, but in a good way, in a kind of comforting way. I loved the feet bits. I was suddenly like, oh my God, my feet are freezing.
And by the way,
feet are freezing cold.
A practice in awareness. My goodness, there's so much I cover in an 8-week course. We're not possibly going to touch on everything now, but things like that, when we're talking about awareness, the fact that we are not aware of things like our bad back and the crook in our neck and our headache, and maybe that's a stress indicator, all those things that we are not aware of because we're just on the go a lot of the time. And, this isn't to call anyone out. My goodness, I do it as well still now. But we lack that awareness. We lack that ability to notice what's happening when it's happening. I always start with the feet because I just think it's a nice way to anchor yourself to the present moment. And, it's a good way to start to understand what awareness means and take this away and start to try doing it in some of your everyday stuff. So when me and Rob go off and have our lunch, maybe you can try that whilst you're eating your lunch. What can you be aware of when you're eating your lunch? Instead of picking up your phone and being distracted, use your senses to be present. The more you do it in these conscious moments of meditation or in your informal practice in your everyday, the easier that stuff becomes when you need it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd imagine what I immediately felt was this might be something quite good to do when you're in the midst of a procrastination storm. In that I often feel if I'm in that mode where I've got stuff to be getting on with, but like you say, LinkedIn's calling in my case, whether it's scrolling LinkedIn or, moving around the different company channels or whatever it might be, check how many listeners we got on the podcast today, all of that stuff that's stopping me from doing that focused work. I'd imagine that an exercise like that might be quite good to do as a page break in your day, almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness, Rob, there's so many different types of meditations, but I think breathing is one of the good ones because it's a really good anchor. And you can do this almost to set up your day. It doesn't take long. I mean, how long were we doing that? Not very long. And you can feel the difference.
Yeah, like 2 minutes or something.
Yeah. And so you can do it at the beginning of your day. You can do it at markers. Like throughout your day, you can do it when you're feeling, like you say, that procrastination, or if you feel like your mind's particularly chatty or you're feeling stressed. There's so many things that it can help with. And then you can even do it to sort of end your day. You had a really busy day. You've been busy at the laptop and doing X, Y, Z, talking to lots of people, maybe been out and about. And then to end your day, I do it often when I'm on the tube or the train on the way home after having a busy day and interacting with lots of people, and just do one of my breathing exercises or put one of my meditation songs on. So there's so many points in your day you can do it. It doesn't have to be this big thing of 20 minutes of silence. Please don't anybody think that's what mindfulness is.
Of course. I was personally just thinking about Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the New York Jets. And he's actually just got injured for the whole season. But he went on a 3-day darkness retreat to make his decision over which team to join. And I think sometimes, I'm sure great for those people that are going on it, but that's often what we think of, I think. We think of those quite extreme retreat-like modes, don't we?
Yeah,
and it obviously
absolutely.
doesn't need to be that.
One of the things, when I talk about accessible and inclusive, what I mean there is that it's different for everyone. Everyone's practice is different. We don't all go to the gym and do exactly the same thing because we take account of the exercises we already do. We take account of what we already eat. We take account of the ability that we have as an individual. And we take the guidance from someone to go and get our 6-pack, not me, FYI. We take our guidance to go to the gym, and then we practice in a way that is comfortable and doable for us. It is exactly the same as our mental fitness and as our physical fitness. It is not one size fits all, but everybody can do it. You just have to find the way that works for you.
Fantastic. And if you're a leader in a business, what's the way they would go about embedding mindfulness or a well-being plan for their company? Where's the best place to start?
The best place to start is with yourself. So as leaders, you really need to be modeling that behaviour And I think that leaders are often, having been there myself and, seeing myself and my peers, are often the worst for it, because you have a lot on your shoulders sometimes. You are managing things upwards and downwards, and there's a lot of pressure there. And I really think that that's where it needs to start. Lead by example, invest in yourself. And when people approach you with ideas, initiative, thoughts, feelings, or experiences around mental health and wellbeing, be open to it. Because I think often we lose the ability to see things from others' perspectives. So as a leader, start with yourself, role model, lead by example, and be open to other people's perspectives and ideas.
I think really good advice, whatever you're trying to do as a leader there, actually, I'd say, let alone embed mental health and wellbeing. I think there's one final thing I'd like to ask you about in this work section, Amy, because I know that something you were passionate about was mindfulness for mums and well-being for parents. And earlier we were talking about the fire service, and we were talking about how here's an area of work where you can't escape trauma. But actually, I'd say in today's society, few of us are escaping trauma of some kind. And a great example would be becoming a parent, and whether it's specifically birth trauma, both for the woman experiencing it and the birthing partner who witnesses it. But that's a good example of actually how a huge number of people are experiencing often untalked about trauma. And I think that there's other examples like grief and that kind of thing. So talk to us about that project in your life of mindfulness for mums and how parenting intersects with work and well-being and all of that stuff.
So when I first started, I guess my sort of side hustle whilst I was still an accountant was the mindfulness for mum thing. And, this was all born out of my passion. I did not see something and think, oh, there's a course, I can train to be a teacher in that and go and make some money. It was literally never that. I had a passion for something, which was mindfulness. I had been through some really tough times with miscarriage and postnatal anxiety. And I knew that the mindfulness practice that I had and the support of my mum was integral to me getting through that in the way that I did. If I didn't have those things, I don't know what I would have done. So teaching really came from that desire to share what I'd learned with other people. It was my passion. I just loved it. And I never thought that it would turn into a business, because I started teaching mums because I felt very lonely when I became a mum. I realised that my friends had been through some struggles and hadn't shared that with me. And it made me really sad. And it also made me probably not speak about things so quickly. I am a very open person, so it didn't take long. But when I finally mentioned to one of my best friends about some of the struggles, she said me too. But I was really sad that I didn't know about that before I opened up about it. And I think we see that a lot. So I started teaching mums mindfulness to, number one, create a community, which was wonderful, where we all supported each other. And also just to share some of those tools to aid communication, to aid self-awareness, so that we're aware when things do not feel right, that it's okay to say so. Motherhood has been the hardest thing I've ever done, the hardest thing that I've ever done. And I think that you grow up thinking, well, everybody's doing it, so it can't be that bad. I think it's pretty darn hard. Just that people aren't talking about that bit. And, even talking to my mum about it, she opened up about her struggles. But she did just get on with it. And I think that's where we are changing now, in being more open about these things. So I think that, like we've talked about this whole podcast, it doesn't matter whether it's work or whether it's your personal life. We are all human beings trying to do our best with the information that we've got. And there are some really difficult things that we face in life, and traumatic events happen. And I think parenthood is one of the most difficult things, regardless of whether you are mother, father, whatever. It is hard. And I think we need to talk about that more. And we need to talk about how we support each other and how we support that bringing a new life into the world, because it's hard. And so, yeah, I don't think it matters whether it's the workplace or anywhere else. I think that we need to talk about these things. I think we need to be open to change. And I think that we need to look after each other.
I've got something that I don't know whether it's going to make it into the eventual episode, but I should say it because I think it's good. I thought to myself the other day, as I'd given my son a bath and I was pulling out undigested pieces of apricot out of the giant poo that he'd just done in the bath. that, my God, parents know how to literally and metaphorically get their hands dirty, get stuck in and understand commitment and understand driving towards a kind of shared goal, a shared purpose. And I was like, you don't understand this before you have something like that in your life. My conclusion was, I want people like that in my business, right? People who understand how to do that. It's not a question, but I just wondered whether you feel anything similar.
Yeah, my goodness. I just think that there's so many moments becoming a parent where you stand there and think, wow, I did not anticipate this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you know what? I also think there's moments where you feel like you've lost yourself. There are moments where you don't feel like yourself. There are moments where your relationship doesn't feel like your relationship. There's so many tough moments. But then there's so many moments like that where, by the way, I know we're talking about poo, but that when you've done it, you feel like invincible. Where you have rescued a poo out of a bath and done it in
Absolutely.
a great way, or you saved your kid from bashing their head because you've got the reflexes of a ninja now that you're a parent, or your intuition led you to do something that worked out right, whether it's taking them to the doctor or whatever. There's so many things. It is the most complicated journey in the world. But like you just said, parents in the workplace, you put us under pressure, you give us a crisis, like boom, as long as we're not too tired, as Rob knows from getting woken up at 4:30 in the morning. If that's the case, give me a pillow.
Disclosure.
I'll be better tomorrow.
I think that is true. We can't escape the sleep deprivation, the biological realities of that. Last question on work now, Amy. I don't know how much you've seen about, there's a big push in the City of London and for established businesses around getting people back into the office. For as far as I can see, no real good reason. And it occurs to me that really it is often parents, people with disabilities, people with neurodivergence, whatever it may be, who get the short end of the stick with this, and that actually flexibility has really helped those people contribute in a fair way, fairer than they had before. What do you think about this whole issue?
About being forced back into the workplace?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is that good for people's mental health?
Clues in the title. Do you know what? We do not live in a world where by the way, who remembers this, massive computer has to be plugged in an office and I have to be in the office. We just don't live in that world. That's the first thing. We don't. We have options. The second thing is this, and I don't even think we need to elaborate on it too much more. Give people choice. There are some brilliant workplaces that people want to be at the workplace. People's friends are there. There are some people like me, I work here at home on my own a lot of the time. I definitely want to be with people some of the time. That makes me very happy. It makes me productive. Sometimes I don't. Give people options. You do not know everything about their life. You don't know everything about the situation and what is the detriment to you of them not being in the office. I can guarantee you now that if you give people options, flexibility and autonomy, you will get better work out of them. Just because someone is present does not mean they are working.
I don't think we need to say anything more about that. Wonderful way talking about that issue. So let's move on to the final section now of our conversation, Amy, and the little bit radical world. So what's a change that you would like to see in the world at large, you'd like people to get behind, that maybe you can't do all by yourself?
I wish that we would look after ourselves, look after each other, and look after our home, our planet, better. And I know it sounds so like pie in the sky and I wish for world peace sort of answer, but I don't know how that can.
Very popular answer to this question. There's nothing wrong with world peace.
But all jokes aside, I just feel like we can't keep doing things the same way and expecting things to change. Of course, the mental health angle for me is a huge one because I care about it so much. But even just the health of our planet and people around us. I just think that we need to look after ourselves and look after each other. I don't think that we can continue the way that we are. I think there needs to be a shift in the world where we get back to that nurturing mindset.
I like that. And maybe an overarching theme there is moving away from where everything's a competition. Because when you're in competition with people, the name of the game is you don't look after them, right? You beat them, you overcome them. And when we live in a society built on competition only, I'm not saying there isn't a healthy way to be competitive. Everyone, don't at me in the comments, as they say. But moving to a more collaborative model and a more supportive model towards all those issues that you talk about would help, I think. Amy, we've come to the end of our conversation today. Thank you so much for teaching me about mindfulness, for talking to us about your fantastic work and not holding back and being so honest and open. The final question is always the same, which is if there's someone out there with a little bit of a radical idea for their own well-being, their own life, a business, they want to start their work, they don't know where to get started, what advice would you give to them?
My advice is this, and it's the mindset that I have with a lot of things now, is if you didn't have fear, what would you do? If you didn't need to earn money, what would you do? And when you are at the end of your life and you look back, would you be happy with what you did? And that's how I reflect all of the time. I think, will my son be proud of me? And did I do the things that I wanted to do? Most things are fixable. You're probably going to make mistakes. I've made plenty. But if you don't go for it, you'll never know. And life's too short.
Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope to speak to you again soon. But until then, take care. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please follow us on your podcast platform. If you'd like to appear on A Little Bit Radical or have an idea of someone we should speak to, please email podcast@standingongiants.com or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can search Rob Fawkes or search Standing on Giants and you'll find me there. Thank you very much and speak to you next time.